every family in America should have some type of plan for dealing with natural disaster, terrorist event, and God forbid, this pandemic that we're all living now. Just be prepared, have a plan and be prepared. It doesn't take much. It's a few $100 to kind of stock up on the basics and at least know that you're covered if something happens.
It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is New York Times bestselling author Brandon Webb, and we're going to be discussing a new book from the SOFREP editors titled Coronavirus How to Prepare, Practical Advice by Special Operations and Military Veterans. Brandon, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, it's been about a year and a half since you were last on the podcast, so let's kick off our conversation again with a bit of the Brandon Webb origin story. So for the listeners encountering you for the first time in our talk today, what are a few things they need to know about you?
Oh, a few things. I would say, let me try and summarize my origin story. So I was raised by hippie parents. I grew up on a sailboat for 5 years for most of my teenage years. I ended up working on boats at a very young age because we were living on a sailboat in a California Ventura Harbor at the time. Ended up getting an amazing job on a scuba diving boat out of Ventura Harbor. So learned how to dive at a really young age. Was a pretty competent deckhand by the time I was 15. Went on a big sailing trip with my family when I was 16. Dad and I started arguing over basic seamanship. I learned at 16 a very important lesson that there can be only one captain on the boat. That was my dad. And him and I agreed that I should leave. So I left home at 16, ended up finding out about the Navy SEAL teams through a book called Rogue Warrior by Dick Marcinko, who was the founder of SEAL Team 6. So joined the Navy to be a SEAL, eventually, made my way into SEAL teams after spending a couple of years in the regular Navy. And, it was at an interesting time. When I got to SEAL Team 3, there was only 2 SEAL teams that were really doing much of anything at that time, because we're talking 1998. And there wasn't a lot of going on in the world at the time. So you had SEAL Team 4 on the East Coast doing a lot of work in South America, and SEAL Team 3 doing a lot of work in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. So I asked to go to SEAL Team 3 because I wanted to work. At that time in the SEAL teams, the teams were responsible for different geographic locations. That's all changed now after 9/11. But I was at SEAL Team 3, and it was SEAL Team 3 had a great culture. It was probably one of the better, in hindsight, one of the better team cultures, at least on the West Coast from my own experience. And it's interesting, like a lot of guys that got out of the SEAL teams and went on to write books like Chris Kyle, The American Sniper, Marcus Luttrell, we're all kind of West Coast guys. Chris and I both being a SEAL Team 3 alumni. I deployed to Afghanistan after 9/11, came back, got involved with training snipers, ended up getting handpicked to run the sniper program as course manager for the West Coast, and then just kind of hit burnout and decided to get out mid-career. People thought I was crazy. I remember not just why are you getting out? People were angry because I had been promoted early twice. The brotherhood exists until the moment you decide to leave. A lot of people were upset. Like, why are you doing this? You wasted this promotion, blah, blah, blah. I do remember, however, Ryan Zinke, who was my boss at the time, was extremely supportive because he knew I had a son while I was deployed to Afghanistan. And he said, look, you got to take care of yourself and your family. So I never forgot that. And for those of you that don't know who Ryan Zinke is, he ended up being a congressman for Montana and briefly served as the Secretary of Interior under President Trump. Great guy, but I'll always kind of remember his words of support. And so I decided to get out in 2006 to really spend more time with my kids, try and save my marriage at the time, and started getting into business. Really just kind of threw myself into entrepreneurship, having come from a family of entrepreneurs. I had a lot of ups and downs. I lost my first startup, but learned a tremendous amount along the way. Then I ended up starting the business I run today, SOFREP Media. That was 8 years ago. I started blogging and writing magazine articles and eventually wrote a book called The Red Circle. This is the first book that I really wrote and did really well, fortunately. And the blogging kind of got me into digital media. If you had asked me when I was teaching snipers that, hey, in a couple of years, you're going to run this digital media company, I would have thought you were nuts. Like, I knew nothing about digital. I knew nothing about digital media. But digital media, got me into e-commerce. Now we're kind of pretty 50-50 split with, running media. And we're a publisher, so we publish on SOFREP.com. We publish news, stories, video. We do a lot of like documentary films. We do interviews with guys like, I got to interview the guy that got me into the SEAL team, Dick Marcinko. I did a big interview series with him. We have a couple podcasts and we make money same way Netflix does. We sell a digital access to our content. And then we have a store. And then 3 years ago, we launched a subscription box called the Crate Club. I had a tremendous amount of growth with the Crate Club, but I was organized as a team around running a media company, not around running e-commerce subscription box, and got my ass handed to me, to be totally honest. Like, we had a lot of growth, and then Facebook changed their algorithm, and the growth slowed down, and then all these problems became apparent. So I spent 2019 fixing stuff and kind of taking a big piece of humble pie. And just coming into 2020, reorganized the business much leaner, and then coronavirus hit. And, I'm extremely thankful that I run a business that's online. Largely are a distributed company. Our writing and video team are all over the U.S. Our developing team is in the Philippines. Marketing, believe it or not, is in Iceland. We're well equipped to kind of deal with this environment. And then we were just in the process of starting up a survival store, a drop ship survival store on SOFREP right before all this happened.
Brandon, I appreciate the overview of your story and giving us really an update of some of the things you've walked through since we last talked. Would love next to kind of just get into the why of this book, and you kind of started leading us into that part of our conversation. But in terms of you and the SOFREP editors, how did this book come about?
So it started with my friends asking me for advice and help. And they were like, this was back in, I would say, January. I belonged to two really impactful and important groups in my life. I belonged to the Young Presidents organization called YPO. Part of my kind of wake-up call in coming out into 2019 with all these growth issues. And it was ugly, man. Like, we over-ordered a ton of inventory, had, $1.5 million in inventory in our warehouse that we didn't know what to do with. When you over-order product, you're basically buying more than you're selling. So we had to deal with that. We had to call vendors and say, look, your net 45, net 60 is now going to be net 180. People were pissed off. So I had to deal with all this stuff. And I said, you know what? I need to go back to school. Through YPO as a resource, my local chapter, I learned about this program at Harvard Business School called OPM. It's basically like an MBA for business owners. So I went back to school. I'm halfway through that 2-year program, but my class in OPM is about 100 business owners from all over the world, and I belong to YPO. So these two groups were really like, hey, what do you think of this coronavirus? What's going on? How do we prepare? I wrote an article for SOFREP, just kind of like Navy SEAL tips on how to prepare. I would say it was met with, when I wrote it, the article published in late, I think the third week of February. Most people at that time in the US were like, oh, it was either like, thank you, this is good stuff, or it was, oh, this is crazy, you're being totally irrational. And I was like, okay. But, the purpose of the article is, this is something that you should have, every family in America should have some type of plan for dealing with natural disaster, terrorist event, and God forbid, this pandemic that we're all living now. Just be prepared, have a plan, and be prepared. It doesn't take much. It's a few $100 to kind of stock up on the basics and at least know that you're covered if something happens. That was kind of the origin of the coronavirus book. And then all of a sudden, shit got real and people were like, oh my God, I'm being told to stay home. It got very real for people. And we decided to write a short ebook for our subscriber base and give it to them for free. So if you were a subscriber to SOFREP, and I think the basic subscription, we just lowered it. It's like $4.99. So for a cup of coffee, you could get access to all our content and this ebook for free. And then we published it on Apple Books because apparently Amazon got just inundated with scammers and Corona this, Corona that. So we're still waiting to get approval to publish that book, even though we're a known kind of publisher on Amazon of ebooks. I respect that because they're trying to do their best to protect people from a lot of bad information and bad actors out there. But that's how we wrote Coronavirus, kind of just how to prepare. And, we try to just include some really practical, useful information. The guys and I that kind of pitched in to write the book, we all have military and survival experience. We also leaned on a special operations medic to kind of give some advice. And it's just a practical book. And the goal of us as a company is, especially on the content side, is how do we be useful in this situation? How do we continue to build trust? And we have an 8-year history of putting out information about, foreign policy, domestic security, and survival stuff. And, how do we contribute to what's happening in a meaningful way that lets us build more trust and build more of a community? And the point I make with that is the book and the fine print says, look, if you can't afford the book, we'll give it to you for free. Just go send us an email. Our goal isn't to profit off the pandemic. It's to kind of continue to run our business and help people the way that we can. Like everybody, we're certainly not experts in everything, but when it comes to this kind of stuff, yeah, we're good at it. Just, I love also my friend Scott Kelly is an astronaut. He wrote an amazing article in the New York Times about if anybody knows how to live in a confined space, it would be somebody in the military, probably the Navy, or Scott, who lived on the freaking tiny space station for 1 year in confinement. So anyway, that's the long story of how the coronavirus book came to be.
One of the things I thought that was interesting, in addition to a lot of practical tips about how to prepare as an individual, prepare your home, you also have a section that talks about pandemics throughout history. I'm curious why y'all decided to include a note about history. I think it's important for us to understand how things like this have rolled out in the past, but what was the intentional thought with including that?
We wanted to provide some background information. I think a lot of people, myself included, right? I had to go relearn about the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. So I think it was important just to go back and provide some background on history. And history can be a valuable teacher for us, right? And I think often we don't pay enough attention to the past, and we continue to kind of relearn lessons the hard way, which when we look to history, there's some signals there that can kind of point us in the right direction if we pay attention. So plus, look, this virus is nasty. It's obviously a lot more than the flu, but the survival rate is very high. My main concern right now is what's going to happen to small business in America. I think that's a very serious topic. I woke up this morning and started a GoFundMe account to just raise money to lend to small business owners who need it. Because the real problem here is just imagine your favorite neighborhood restaurant or coffee shop. They get hit with no warning, have to shut down. I would say most restaurants, at least my favorite ones, they're not doing a ton of online delivery business. And the ones that want to start today and get on Uber Eats, it's a long application process. They got to send them a tablet. You got to be verified. And imagine the increase in applications and time to kind of transform a favorite neighborhood restaurant into kind of an online delivery business. The point is these places like this got hit so fast, so hard. I would say safe guess that most restaurants have about 60 days of working capital. And now you get the situation where the government is passing this massive stimulus package, which is great. The big businesses will get bailed out. Some businesses in the middle will go away. And the small business is screwed because they needed the money yesterday. By the time this bill gets passed, hopefully today, they're now saying, oh, you can apply for the SBA. Look, I was an appointed member of the SBA on the Veteran Advisory Committee. The SBA does a lot of good things. Loaning money quickly is not one of them. And so it's going to take 4 to 6 months for these businesses to get access to capital. And by that time, it's too late. They're out of business. Like, it's done. Game over. Unlike the last recession we're in, this is going to wipe out these neighborhood small businesses that we love and rely on and are kind of the backbone of the American economy. And that's the sad thing. So that's why my new cause as of this morning, I rallied my YPO group, my Harvard group, and immediately donations started coming in. And the plan is, this isn't giving a handout to a small business owner. This is a loan. Like, they're going to have to repay it back. But, the thing that I learned at Harvard Business was they push this on us all the time. It's like, look, guys, people in this room, people running businesses are the world's problem solvers. You guys have to do your fair share and pitch in. So I think that's kind of the call to action I woke up with was, okay, I think me and my friends can raise enough money to save a couple businesses. And if we save a couple, that's a success. And it's not a handout. They're going to have to repay the loan. But in the same kind of SBA fashion, it'll be a long-term loan, low interest rate, but they're going to have to pay it back. And they need to show a plan back to profitability, right? So in my restaurant example, it would be enough working capital for a restaurant to kind of pivot to really organize itself around delivering food with online orders, delivering it to the home. So, they need enough to kind of get through that pivot and survive. And then when things go back to normal, the favorite restaurant that we know and love and is packed all the time will be back and fine and not out of business, because a lot of these businesses they're just going to walk away. We have a term for it. It's called a walk-away bankruptcy. You don't file any paperwork. You literally just drop the keys and walk away. And that's unfortunately going to happen to a lot of businesses unless we kind of pitch in and do our part.
A slight left turn, Brandon, before we wrap up. I'm always curious about what sort of books people are reading, what's impacted them in the past 6 to 12 months. As you shared earlier, you've walked through kind of a fire, so to speak, in 2019 in reorging and restructuring. What were some of the books or resources that encouraged you, challenged you, helped shift your thinking as you were recreating yourself once again, you might say?
When I went back to school, I've probably read 150 case studies, maybe even more, from Rent the Runway to Danaher Corporation. A lot of people never even heard of Danaher. They're a beast of a company. They own Leica camera, for instance, is one of their companies, a lot of medical device companies. So I would say just that reading made a real impact on me. But also, I'm a fan of you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And I like to be on the solution curve. That book, Abundance by Peter Diomedes, great book. Peter is one of the people in the world making a positive difference. His newsletter, The Abundance Insider, I would encourage everyone to go sign up for that. I find I get inspired by reading a lot of fiction as well, just because it spurs creativity. I read that book, Ready Player One, and the big takeaway there was, wow, the internet in 5 to 10 years is probably going to go virtual. And how do I prepare for that as a business owner? Because imagine, flipping down your goggles, or maybe it's a pair of glasses by that time. It happens, but the way we experience the internet is going to change drastically. And once it goes to kind of mixed reality or virtual reality, think about the way we interact with that kind of world, and it'll be a virtual commerce, real commerce. You'll be able to like flip the goggles down, walk through a virtual aisle at your favorite store, pick stuff out, buy it, and then it'll ship to your home. So it's like in the entertainment side of that, like how do I prepare for the way people consume content? So that's why I do think it's important to also read a lot of fiction. I think that answers your question.
Perfect. Always appreciate great book recommendations. Brandon, for the listeners who'd like to connect with you, find out more about SOFREP, Crate Club, your books, where are some of the places we can find you on the web?
I would say the two places, SOFREP.com, and that's SOF as in Frank, REP.com. My author website, BrandonTylerWebb.com. I also am giving away, for the foreseeable future, all of my ebooks are free right now. You can go, I think I've got at least 3 up right now. You can go to my author page, BrandonTylerWebb.com, download the ebook version on the house. I just asked for people to leave a review. I gave one book away for free, The Red Circle, and I had so much positive feedback. Either people had read the book, read it again, read it for the first time, or were so grateful that I was like, you know what, I'm giving them all away. So as I kind of claw through my online library with my assistant, I'm trying to get as many books as I can up there for free for people just to read while we have all this time on our hands, probably for the next few months at least. So those are the two places.
Well, like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places you can connect with Brandon, as well as all of the websites and books that have been mentioned throughout the episode. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Brandon Webb. Once again, our book today was Coronavirus, How to Prepare, Practical Advice by Special Operations and Military Veterans. Again, to connect with Brandon and find out more, a great place to start is his website. You can find that over at BrandonTylerWebb.com. And Brandon, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's always an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks, Shaun. I appreciate it.